You know what separates a man every woman chases from the one she forgets after a few conversations? It's not money, it's not charm, it's not looks. It's something far more subtle. He doesn't seek approval, he commands respect. And that shift in energy changes everything. Most men, without realizing it, are operating from a place of emotional scarcity. They walk into conversations, dates, or relationships hoping to be chosen, hoping to say the right thing, do the right thing, and be agreeable enough that a woman will validate their worth. But here's the truth. The moment you make her perception of you more important than your own perception of yourself, you give away your power. And the moment you give away your power, she senses it. Women don't chase men who beg to be seen. They chase men who already see themselves clearly. There's a psychology behind this. It's called social proof of value. When you don't try to prove your worth, it signals that you already know it, that you operate from abundance, not lack, from centeredness, not neediness. And ironically, when you stop trying to win her approval, she becomes curious about you. Why aren't you performing? Why aren't you trying to impress? What does he know about himself that I don't? That mystery, that self-containment, it's deeply attractive, not because you're playing games, but because you're living truthfully. When you walk through life rooted in your identity, you naturally raise the bar. You show people, not just women, that your time, your energy, your attention are sacred. You don't bend for validation. You don't shrink to avoid conflict. And you definitely don't compromise your values just to be liked. You hold your ground, not with arrogance, but with quiet certainty. And that's what makes you unforgettable. Now understand, this isn't about disrespect. This isn't about being cold or emotionally unavailable. It's about moving through life with the kind of self-possession that doesn't need external applause. You're not performing for the world. You're showing up as you are, unfiltered, unafraid, and unapologetically self-assured. And that level of presence, that's rare. That's magnetic. When a woman senses that you respect yourself, when she sees that you don't chase attention because you're already centered in your value, she stops seeing you as just another option. You become a standard. You become the mirror that reflects where she needs to grow and who she could become if she steps up to your level. That's when the dynamic shifts. That's when she begins to pursue, not because she has to, but because she wants to be around a man who doesn't crumble under pressure, who doesn't fold for affection, who doesn't beg for love. Because when you stop seeking approval, you stop asking for permission to be powerful. Let that sink in. The chase doesn't begin when you go after her. It begins when you return to yourself. There's a quiet truth most men never get told. When you start prioritizing your purpose over the pursuit of women, the entire dynamic changes. You stop orbiting around her world, and she starts noticing the gravity of yours. Because contrary to what society often suggests, women don't chase men who chase them. They chase men who are moving towards something bigger than them both. Purpose is magnetic. It grounds your energy, it focuses your mind, and most importantly, it shifts your emotional center from needing validation to building value. When you operate from purpose, you're not led by temporary feelings or external distractions. You move with intent. And women, especially emotionally intelligent women, feel that. They don't just see your actions, they sense your direction. Psychologically, this speaks to a phenomenon called self-determination theory. It's the idea that humans are naturally drawn to people who embody autonomy, competence, and relatedness. A man who is focused on something beyond just getting a woman is living from internal motivation. He has discipline, vision, drive, and that signals competence. That's attractive not just in the romantic sense, but in a deeply primal, evolutionary sense. It tells her, this man knows where he's going, and that's a path worth following. Now, let's be clear. This doesn't mean you neglect relationships or avoid emotional connection. It means you don't prioritize chasing someone else's attention over building your own legacy. You don't lose yourself trying to be what she wants. You stay rooted in your mission, and the right woman aligns with that, not the other way around. You stop bending for attraction and start becoming the kind of man who naturally draws it in. When you're on purpose, your energy changes. You're no longer needy, you're focused, you show up differently. You make time instead of chasing time. You don't overextend for meaningless interactions, you guard your time like your future depends on it. because it does. And when she sees that, when she feels that she's dealing with a man who values his time and vision above everything else, she doesn't pull away. She leans in. This kind of energy is rare. In a world full of distractions where so many men are addicted to instant gratification, likes, texts, flings, a man who chooses long-term vision over short-term attention becomes unforgettable. Not because he's trying to be seen, but because he's busy becoming. So the question isn't, how do I get her to chase me? The question is, what am I chasing that's worth becoming so magnetic she can't ignore it? Because when your purpose becomes your pursuit, you become the one worth pursuing. Never forget, your focus is your power. And the man who walks with purpose doesn't need to chase women. He simply becomes the destination. There's something incredibly powerful, almost unnerving, about a man who has mastered emotional self-control. In a world where emotional reactivity is the default, where people lash out, cling on, or spiral at the first sign of challenge, the man who remains composed becomes a rare force. And that force, that centered calm, is deeply attractive. Not because it's performative, but because it reveals something very few men possess: inner mastery. Most men are taught directly or indirectly to measure their worth by how others respond to them. If she texts back, he feels valued. If she pulls away, he panics. If she gives him attention, he's euphoric. But the moment she's distant, his entire sense of self becomes unstable. That's not love. That's addiction to external regulation. And when you live like that, you are constantly at the mercy of someone else's approval, emotions, and inconsistency. But let's be real. Women test men, not maliciously, not always consciously, but emotionally, psychologically, because that's how they gauge your strength. Not your physical strength, but your inner frame. They want to know, can you stay grounded when I'm emotional? Can you hold steady when I'm unsure? Can you be the calm in the chaos? When a man reacts with desperation, anger, or emotional volatility, it signals to her that he is easily swayed. He can be triggered. He's not centered in himself. And here's the hard truth. No woman wants to build her emotional home in a man who crumbles under pressure. But when a man demonstrates composure, not coldness, but calmness, he instantly becomes the safe space, the lighthouse, the rare one. This is not about being a robot. It's about choosing response over reaction. It's about noticing your triggers but not becoming them. It's about being fully aware of your emotions without letting them dominate your behavior. That kind of presence, it's a superpower. And it doesn't just make you attractive. It makes you trustworthy, powerful, and magnetic. From a psychological lens, this is emotional regulation. And in evolutionary terms, it speaks to leadership. A man who can regulate his emotions is perceived as someone who can lead not only himself but others. And that taps into something primal. Because at the core, women aren't chasing adrenaline, they're chasing certainty, stability, direction. Now imagine you're that man. You're unbothered by passive-aggressive texts. You don't chase when she withdraws. You don't crumble under silence. You observe. You stay centered. You continue building your life, knowing that emotions are waves, and you are the ocean beneath them. That doesn't just make her curious. It makes her lean in. Because when you no longer lose yourself to gain her attention, you become the very thing she can't look away from. Emotional control isn't suppression. It's self-possession. And the man who owns himself never has to beg to be seen. There's something unmistakably powerful about a man who knows his worth and, more importantly, lives by it. And one of the clearest signals of that worth is not just in what he says he values, but in what he tolerates. When a man elevates his standards and enforces clear boundaries, he stops being an option and starts becoming a standard. That's when the dynamic flips. That's when she begins to notice that your time, energy, and presence aren't easily accessed, and that alone is deeply attractive. Most men don't lose because they aren't good enough. They lose because they lower their standards to maintain connection. They accept disrespect, inconsistency, or mixed signals because they're afraid that holding firm might push her away. But here's the deeper truth. What you tolerate, you invite. And what you invite becomes the structure of the dynamic. If you don't define your boundaries, someone else will define them for you. From a psychological perspective, boundaries are more than defense mechanisms. They are reflections of identity. They say, this is who I am. This is what I accept. This is what I won't negotiate. And when a woman sees that you're not just preaching self-worth, but actually living it, by walking away when necessary, by holding space without chasing, by saying no without guilt, it creates a powerful contrast. She's not used to it. Most men are too afraid to risk rejection. But you're willing to lose her rather than lose yourself. Now let's make something clear. Boundaries aren't walls. They aren't used to control or punish. They are clarity. They are a signal of a man who isn't desperate to be liked, but determined to be respected. And that kind of man commands more than just her attention. He commands her admiration. It's philosophical, too. The Stoics spoke often about living in accordance with nature. And for a man, part of that nature is strength in integrity. Not the loud kind, not the arrogant kind, the quiet, unwavering kind. A man who doesn't fold under pressure, who doesn't dilute his standards for temporary affection, that man stands out. Not because he's trying to prove anything, but because his life is proof. And women notice. They notice when you don't flinch at games. They notice when you're not emotionally swayed by hot and cold behavior. They notice when you don't chase because you've already chosen yourself. And that self-respect, that's the thing that plants a seed in her mind. If I want to be close to this man, I have to meet him at his level. That's when the chase begins. So stop asking what she wants from you. Ask what you require of yourself. Raise the standard, not out of ego, but out of reverence for your own journey. Because when your boundaries speak louder than your words, you no longer chase, you lead. And every woman worth your time will rise to meet you there. There's a subtle but profound shift that happens when a man steps into self-ownership, not just in his goals or discipline, but in how he carries himself socially. And one of the clearest indicators of that ownership is when he stops trying to convince people to like him, especially women. He no longer over-explains, over-apologizes, or performs for approval. Why? Because he understands that true confidence is quiet. It doesn't chase attention. It commands respect simply by being. In the dating world, most men are trained, either directly or subconsciously, to believe that they must prove their worth, that they have to be nice enough, funny enough, or charming enough to earn affection. And so they engage in emotional theater. They become overly agreeable, they smile when they don't mean it, they hide their real opinions to avoid friction. But the tragedy is this. The more you perform to be accepted, the less of yourself you actually bring to the table. Authenticity becomes the casualty of approval seeking. And the irony, the very thing you suppress, your truth, your firmness, your unfiltered self, is the thing that would have made you stand out. Because women, especially women who've done their own inner work, can feel when a man is presenting a version of himself that's curated for approval. And it doesn't create attraction, it creates distrust. Subconsciously, it says this man doesn't trust that who he is enough. But when a man no longer bends himself to fit someone else's expectations, everything shifts. He stops fearing rejection because he realizes rejection is simply redirection. He stops needing to be chosen because he's already chosen himself. And that kind of man, the one who walks in full ownership of who he is and isn't, becomes magnetic. Not because he's loud about it, but because he radiates inner freedom. This is psychological grounding. This is the philosophical principle of authentic being, a man refusing to betray himself to be liked. And let's be clear, this doesn't mean you're rude. It doesn't mean you don't listen or grow. It means you stop editing yourself to avoid discomfort. You speak your truth with tact, you hold your opinions with confidence, and you trust that whoever is meant to walk beside you will respect you for it. And when a woman sees that you are not trying to win her with performance, but showing up fully as yourself, she leans in. Because that level of self-ownership is rare. It tells her, you're not seeking a fan, you're seeking a partner. You're not desperate for love, you're rooted in self-respect. So if you want to be the man women chase, stop performing and start being. Not the filtered version, not the agreeable version, the true version. Because the moment you stop chasing approval is the moment you start attracting what's real. There's something deeply compelling about a man who cultivates mystery, not as a tactic, but as a way of life rooted in self-respect and emotional discipline. In a world oversaturated with oversharing and constant availability, the man who isn't always easily read, Who doesn't put his entire emotional blueprint on display from the first conversation becomes irresistible. Not because he's playing games, but because his depth isn't instantly accessible. It must be earned. Now, let's be clear. Mystery isn't about manipulation or withholding for the sake of power. It's about restraint. It's about not giving away everything before someone has earned the right to see it. When a man has mystery, he creates space for curiosity. And that curiosity in a woman's psyche can be more powerful than direct pursuit. It invites her to lean in, to wonder, to engage emotionally and mentally on a deeper level. Because we don't value what is constantly available and over-explained. We value what challenges us to explore. There's a psychological foundation to this, known as the information gap theory. It's the idea that when we sense a gap between what we know and what we want to know, we feel compelled to close it. When a man reveals just enough about himself to be intriguing, but not so much that nothing's left to learn, he opens that gap. He makes a woman feel emotionally invested in discovering more, not through artificial mystery, but through intentional self-containment. This kind of emotional pacing is rare. Most men, when attracted to a woman, immediately offer everything. They overshare their thoughts, plans, feelings, even their past wounds in hopes of accelerating connection. But connection rushed is connection diluted. Depth takes time. Attraction is not just about what you give. It's about what you withhold with purpose. It's in the pauses, the spaces between where mystery grows. And in those spaces, real desire is born. From a philosophical standpoint, this aligns with what many ancient thinkers believed, that what is truly valuable is never handed out freely. It must be earned, discovered, uncovered through time and attention. You become the man who doesn't broadcast his every move, who doesn't oversell his vision, who allows his life to speak for itself. That creates magnetism. That's when she starts watching closely, asking questions, leaning into the quiet details. So the challenge is this. Don't be so eager to be fully understood. Don't rob someone of the beauty of gradually discovering you. Let your energy be felt, not forced. Let your presence be consistent, but not consuming. Be real, but not overly available. In a world obsessed with transparency, sometimes the most powerful thing you can be is just a little unknown. Because the man who doesn't reveal everything becomes the man she can't stop thinking about. And that silence, that space, that's where desire begins to grow.